The 2008 Toyota Freedom Challenge Race Across South Africa is brought to you by Toyota. Toyota, lead the way. Having finally descended the Swartberg and dropping into the Karoo near Hofmeyer, Andrew King and Matt Botha could sense that the nature of the race had changed. Having already ridden 1,000 kilometers in 8 days from Pietermaritzburg, the two competitors in the 2008 Toyota Freedom Challenge Race Across South Africa still had a lot of work to do. Lying in joint third place and with over 1,300 kilometers still to go through the Karoo, up and over the Winelands Kloof, along the Swartberg mountain range and into Paarl, the pair would have to continue their current pace of riding, an average of 18 hours a day, if they hope to maintain pace with Sirk Lutz, a few minutes ahead of them in second place, and current race leader Tim James, now with a massive day-and-a-half lead. After 7 hours of riding since leaving the Romansfontein support station just outside of Maltino, Matt and Andrew decided to find a place in Hofmeyer for a quick lunch. The Karoo Boss farm stall is famous for serving up some of the best pies in the Karoo, and the hungry riders wasted no time in getting stuck in. From Hofmeyer, the route would take the riders through the town of Craddock and across the famous Fish River before climbing the mountainous region surrounding the Mountain Zebra National Park. After the Grootvlagte portage section and heading past Pearson, the route then heads through the Karoo Poort towards Darlington Dam before heading through the Perdepoort below the Winelands Kloof Mountains. Having not stopped at Hofmeyer, Sirk had now opened up a sizable 1-hour lead on Matt and Andrew and had pushed through the Elandsberg support station and was headed for Baroda Bridge over the Fish River just outside Craddock.
We reached Elandsberg, the support station. Sirk, who was a bit in front of us, probably about an hour in front of us now, he's pressed on. So we've got no option if we want to keep in the race, we've got to keep going. Next support station is still about 100 kilometers, so we've got to do the same as what we've done today. We've got to do it again this evening and tonight. Oh, that is the answer to a sore bum.
After restocking on supplies from their 2-liter race boxes that were sent ahead to each support station, Matt and Andrew took a few minutes to prepare themselves and attend to some blisters caused by the many hours of pushing and carrying their bikes. The pair said their goodbyes to Jaco and Carl, their two riding companions for the day that had started in the batch 2 days before Andrew and Matt in Pietermaritzburg, before heading out onto the open road again. Being late in the afternoon and still having 100 kilometers to ride before the next support station at Rietfontein Lodge, the pair picked up the pace over the flattish district roads. They knew that if they did not make it to the support station within 1 or 2 hours after Sirk, that he would most definitely capitalize on the extra sleep and would continue to ride away from them and increase his lead in the coming days. After a long night of riding through the game enclosures around Craddock and a few mechanical issues with the bike, a weary but elated pair made it to the Rietfontein Lodge, where to their surprise they found Steve Burnett, a strong rider who had left in the batch a day ahead of them from Pietermaritzburg. After another early start, Matt, Andrew and Sirk, and now with new recruit Steve Burnett, soon realized that teamwork would be the only way forward if they intended on catching the race leader, Tim James, whose lead was now nearly 300 kilometers.
Feeling good, eh? Legs are feeling strong, feeling fit. It's damn bum of mine. It's coming right, I think it's coming right slowly, but it's still damn sore.
The Freedom Challenge route is so diverse, taking in all types of terrain, that no sooner had the riders settled into a nice rhythm on an open district road that they would find themselves in some remote valley, climbing farm boundary fences, crossing rivers, and again pushing up some long farm track. But by now they knew that at the top of every long climb was another breathtaking descent down the other side. Just before lunchtime, the team made it to Tolle Jordaan's farm Grootvlagte, where they could look forward to some good food and a restock from their race boxes.
Just arrived to a bit of a strange welcome. At the front door, there's a bowl. And I'm not too sure what to make of it, whether those are welcome snacks or I actually don't know. So I'm a bit nervous to go inside and see what we've got for lunch.
That's what we need, the maps. Oh, smell that.
Why did we send puppets ahead? Oh, do you want to do the Freedom Challenge? No, why would I want to do that? That's dumb. It's only for crazy people.
After enjoying a wonderful meal and a quick snooze in the warm winter sun, the 4 Freedom Challenge riders made their way onto the surrounding farmlands for yet another off-road section. After a steep push up to the plateau, the path ran along a deserted valley with old dilapidated farmhouses, stables and mills, before reaching the single-track path down off the mountain, which was demarcated with white lime wash painted on the rocks. After yet another 2-hour portage section down off the mountain, Cirque again made a break from the group and opened up another small lead. 20 minutes later, Matt, Andrew and Steve emerged from the farm road onto the main tar road, running towards Pearson and the remaining 34 kilometers to the support station at Kraal. At Kraal, Matt and Andrew had now caught up to the group of Ikopo farmers that had left in the first batch from Pietermaritzburg 3 days ahead of them.
I need a bit of luck today. 9 falls in 9 days. I think today's my day, eh? We are going to have a clean run. Got new grips. Hope it's going to save my hands a bit. Got my luck charm. I think today's the turning phase of my race.
Again working as a team, Matt, Andrew, Cirque and Steve enjoyed a great morning of riding on a wide variety of terrain, from thrilling downhill descents from high ridgelines to the inevitable push up the other side. By this stage in the race, all the riders of the Freedom Challenge had become experts in scaling locked farm gates. This electric game fence proved to be a test for everyone, but through teamwork, everyone made it safely to the other side. By lunchtime, the Tim James train, as they were now calling themselves, experienced their first sign of rain in 9 days as they made their way through the Tukom's support station at Somerset East. At the support station, the riders had met up with Dave Wadilove, the race director, and because of the inclement weather, Dave had suggested that the 4 riders take a shortcut around the west side of the nearby Darlington Dam. However, a misunderstanding in the instructions meant that the 4 cyclists would soon be off the correct path and would be heading for some major drama. Only when the path ran out and the riders found themselves on the muddy banks of the Darlington Dam did they realize something was wrong. But at this stage, they had come too far off course and had no option but to continue on in the hopes of connecting up with the original track as per their map.
Try a bit of a long jump here. Oh no! I'm absolutely stuck. You have to come across, G. I'm 100% stuck. Hurry up, G. Yes. Well, that's a long jump.
Steve, the other riders just phoned Dave, the organizer, and he says that we're going the wrong way. I think it's pretty obvious, but instructions from him were just follow the track, which we did. Clearly there was more than one track. Not too sure where from here. Doesn't look like it's going to get any easier that way. We've come a long way that way.
Unfortunately, there were not too many other options available, and Andrew soon resigned himself to the fact that he was also about to become very muddy. After the demoralizing and, more importantly, time-consuming hassles in the mud, the team were now again on the back foot, with still over 100 kilometers to go that evening. To add insult to injury, Matt and Andrew received the news that race leader Tim James had not only traversed the Bavianskloof as expected, but was pushing on through towards Willowmore and thus extending his lead to a full 2 days. Having done the Freedom Challenge the year before, Tim knew the route well and was far better prepared than any other rider. His knowledge of the route and what to expect, along with his good physical preparation and a determined spirit, meant that barring a disaster or mechanical failure, Tim would have an unassailable lead over the remaining 900 kilometers to Cape Town.
Ultimately, we should have cleaned our bikes. I mean, they're still filthy from the mud yesterday, from crawling through the mud. But we were just too tired and went straight to bed. Bikes are taking an absolute beating.
Matt, Andrew, Cirque and Steve once again set out at daybreak together. At the Bucklands support station, they had finally caught up with a strong group of riders from the first batch that had left 3 days ahead of them. This group included Andrew Barnes and Dani Nell, the two athletes that had entered the Freedom Challenge Extreme Triathlon, which involves running the Comrades Marathon, then riding the Freedom Challenge to reach Paarl before the start of the 220-kilometer 4-day Berg River Canoe Marathon, a truly monumental test for any athlete. After turning eastwards away from Cape Town and crossing through the Groetrivier Valley, the route drops into the Baviaanskloof via the treacherous Osseberg 4x4 trail down towards Cambria. From Cambria, the road winds its way 170 kilometers through the spectacular Baviaanskloof Mountains and ultimately through the Neverkloof Pass before emerging back in the Karoo at Willowmore.
Woo! You don't want to come around there too quickly.
Having dropped down into the Groetrivier Gorge, the riders began the long climb out again towards the start of the famed Osseberg 4x4 route.
I think we got some serious gravity credit now, and it's rumored to be one of the gnarliest 4x4 routes in the country.
Over the past 12 days of riding, Matt was slowly losing all feeling in his fingers and thumbs, so much so that he had to use the palm of his hand to change gears on his bike, and he was soon about to find out why.
Attending to Matt's bike and realized the suspension was quite hard. We've actually just seen that the lockout system has been on. Not all the way, but on. Basically means he's ridden 1,400 kilometers with a rigid fork bike. It's quite a long way to ride without front suspension. And he's having major issues with his hands, taking a pounding on the handlebars, and this could potentially be the answer.
After loosening the lockout on Matt's front shock, the pair headed out on what was one of the longest and most extreme downhills that they would encounter on their entire journey. Unfortunately, Matt's predictions that all of his falls were behind him proved to be wrong.
That's it. I'm going in.
Having ridden over 500 kilometers in the last 3 days, including about 8 hours of portaging, Matt and Andrew were reveling in the almost 15 kilometers of non-stop downhills and switchbacks. By the time they reached the valley floor and crossed the Groetrivier numerous times, the pair were confident that they would make it to the finish in Paarl inside their original goal of 16 days. As with the previous 12 days, day 13 was another early start.
Scary to think that it's 4:15 in the morning and we're already late, so it's an early start.
One of the most unfortunate aspects of racing the Freedom Challenge is having to ride some of the most spectacular areas in the dark. But as the sun came up, Matt and Andrew began to take in the spectacular green valleys and mountains of the Baviaanskloof Mega Reserve. Despite the amazing riverine forests and imposing yellow woods, at 6:30 in the morning, the thermometer was still in the single digits.
It's too cold at the moment. My fingers are absolutely frozen, my toes are frozen, and now look what I've got ahead of me.
Fortunately, as the sun began to peek over the mountaintops, so things began to warm up a little for the two riders. Further up the road, drama was unfolding as the seat post of the extreme triathlon participant Andrew Barnes had begun to crack at the frame, and New Zealand rider Stuart Brew was doing his best to come up with a makeshift solution with a piece of nylon rope. Not knowing how much longer the temporary repair would hold, Andrew set off around another one of the great switchbacks on Combrings Pass. Having finally reached the flatter section along the Babianskloof Valley floor, Matt and Andrew finally made it to the Dansedrift support station at Studis for some lunch. There they found everyone enjoying some well-needed rest and food, while they waited for Andrew Barnes' bike to come back from the workshop, where some locals had managed to weld a makeshift metal collar around the seat post. By late afternoon, Steve Burnett was blazing a trail ahead of the pack, crossing the Durang River and coming up out of the Neverkloof Pass and back into the Karoo. A few kilometers back, and things were not going so well for Andrew, who was starting to suffer from chronic fatigue from the endless days of physical punishment and was barely able to turn the pedals over.
I think 2 weeks of long days and no sleeping is starting to add up big time.
After a quick sandwich, the pair bravely pushed on into the sunset, knowing that with 40 kilometers still to go before Willowmore, that this was going to be another late night.
That was one long, hard dirt ride, my brother. 170 kilometers dirt ride. How's this tarmac?
At 9:30 p.m., a tired but confident pair arrived at the Willows Historical Guest House in Willowmore.
Okay, we dug deep right at the end there to pull that through. I think it was we can be confident from now on, because after that like that, we can achieve pretty much anything, I think.
I'm not too sure what even day it is anymore. I think in our ride it's day 13 or 12 or 14. Not too sure what day of the week it is. You kind of just totally lose touch with the outside world.
With Matt and Andrew now 2/3 of their way through the 2,300 kilometer journey, things were going to start becoming a bit more interesting in terms of race strategy. Cirque had left early from Willowmore and was planning a monster 250 kilometer day through to Prince Albert, up the infamous Swartberg Pass and down into Die Hel. With Andrew still feeling the deep-set fatigue that he had experienced the evening before, the pair knew that they would not be able to match Cirque's efforts that day. Instead, they decided on a medium-pace recovery day, but this would leave them with very little time to make up the lost ground on Cirque in the next 2 or 3 days before the finish. Having reached Willowmore and the Swartberg mountain range, the route continued westward on fast undulating district roads towards Prince Albert, before climbing up the 13 switchbacks of Swartberg Pass and turning down into the historical valley of Gamkaskloof, or otherwise known as Die Hel. The route bypasses Langsberg and the Serverweekspoort before heading into the Enaesberg Nature Reserve. At their slower pace, Matt and Andrew were able to take in more of their beautiful stark surroundings along the Donkerhoeksrivier and occasionally heading onto various farm owners' land as they weaved their way towards Prince Albert.
A short distance beyond these buildings, it reaches a larger road where you'll turn right to continue to Prince Albert.
Jy mooi kyk vir die dorings. Jy mooi kyk vir die
Dit is nie sand soos daai ander pad nie.
Nee, daai is sleg, nee. Ja, hier is ook maar sand. Dis ook maar sand.
Further up the road, Steve, Stuart Brew, Andrew Barnes and Alan Sharp were setting a blistering pace with the hope of reaching Prince Albert before sunset in order to get some much-needed sleep. By late afternoon, Matt and Andrew had settled on a strategy for the race. They had enjoyed a relatively easy day riding, and upon reaching the Prince Albert support station, they would clean their bikes for the last time and then get to bed as soon as possible to get in one last decent sleep before the morning. From then on, their plan was to cover the remaining 495 kilometers in 2 days with as little sleep as possible, to reach the start of the final Steynskloof portage up to the Dutoitskloof Pass and onto a shanty wine estate in Paarl. It was a bold plan, but 2 weeks of hard riding had prepared them both physically and mentally for the challenge that lay ahead. And so, with a clear idea of what had to be done, they enjoyed the last few kilometers of their ride that day, soaking in the splendor of their surroundings and joy of the open road. After a modest 6:30 a.m. start from Prince Albert, Matt and Andrew soon reached Swartberg Pass, but it was not all plain sailing for Matt this early in the morning.
Backpack's heavy. Sure is heavy. Can feel the difference in weight. Low back's taking strain. Whew.
Soon both riders found a good rhythm, pushing on relentlessly up the 27-kilometer mountain pass to the summit at 1,583 meters above sea level. The pass is over 120 years old, having been completed in 1888, and was the final masterpiece of Thomas Bain, who constructed 24 major passes in his lifetime, including the mountain pass through the Baviaanskloof that the riders had passed over just 2 days earlier. On reaching the top of the pass, Matt had shaken off his back pain and was back to his normal self.
Reach up to the sky. Sunshine Mountain, you and I, 2, 3, 4, you and I.
And after taking in what they could of the breathtaking folds of the sedimentary rock formations of the Swartberg Pass, they continued on to the turnoff into Die Hel. The 50-kilometer road into Hamkaskloof is usually reserved for 4x4s, but on this day Andrew and Matt would have to rely on human power to get them up and over the 12-kilometer climb to the summit of the pass. Once over the summit, their efforts were rewarded with another thrilling descent into the heart of the Hamkas Valley via the numerous switchbacks. Once in the valley, the two riders would be able to enjoy a good meal at the local restaurant aptly named the Devil's Kitchen. After which they were shown some of the historical items of the valley, including a small snuff box given to the owners by Denise Rates, who was part of General Smuts' commando when they came through this area on the run from the British during the Anglo-Boer War of 1900.
And we still have it in the family, and it's been given on 4 or 5 generations until the next generation has got it still.
Somebody's put a rock in my bag.
Whilst Matt and Andrew were finishing their lunch, Cirque was now 80 kilometers ahead on the short tar road section near Langsberg on his way to the Enaesberg Nature Reserve. Before the road was built into Die Hel in 1963, the only access in and out of the valley was via a mountain donkey trail, affectionately called Die Leer, or the ladder.
There are 2 poplar trees that we have to look for, where the ladder starts, and deep down in the valley there, we can actually see the poplar trees, and there's almost a sheer cliff with a kind of rocky path that leads up it somehow. And that's the ladder over there. And I don't know how we're going to get up that, because it looks unbelievably steep and it just climbs all the way to the top. The ladder, I was expecting quite a nice cut fine path up a mountain, and this is nothing what I expected. And apparently that's the ladder up there somewhere. How are we supposed to get up here? I don't know. This is unbelievably sharp and steep.
When the dam wall was built on the Hamkas River, cutting off the inhabitants' only access to the outside world, Die Leer was used to cart fresh produce by donkey to the nearby town of Langsberg to be sold at the market. But now no longer used on a regular basis, Die Leer has become loose and overgrown and is certainly not conducive to easy passage with a bicycle. After an hour of continuous climbing, Matt and Andrew were able to look back over the view of the valley through which they had just ridden, before connecting back up with the Bosleeskloof Road, past the famous Severwerkspoort that heads to Karlitsdorp, and onto their next support station at the farm Rupos. Despite the best efforts of Andrew, Matt and Cirque, Tim James was busy making his way over the last few kilometers of the route into Ashanti wine estate in Paarl. Whilst climbing up Die Leer 2 days previously, Tim had irreparably damaged his rear derailleur on a rock and had converted his bike to a single speed in order to continue on. Tim had capitalized perfectly on his previous year's knowledge of the race, as well as his meticulous preparation and his unstoppable determination to win the race and beat the race record by a few hours. There to meet Tim at Ashanti was the previous year's winner Martin van Dalsen. both realizing that it would take a Herculean effort to better the record set by Tim this time around. Meanwhile, back at the Swartberg Mountains, Matt and Andrew were determined to continue with their race strategy to catch Cirque and race for second place.
Got about 30 k's more into Rupos, and then it's time to start racing because Zirk's ahead of us. The other guys are just ahead of us. I think they'll stay on Rupos tonight. Our tactic is to arrive there just after them, let them get nice and comfortable, have a shower, get settled in, and as we arrive we're going to push through. We're going to see if we can't get to Iceberg. It's a massive, massive ask, but we've got 400 k's ahead of us. We need to tackle it somehow. I think the best way to do it is go hard and then go harder.
Arriving at Rupos, they found the bikes of the other competitors who were already asleep. And after a good meal, they packed their kit and maps for the remainder of their journey. Leaving Rupos at 8:30 p.m., Matt and Andrew were looking to complete the last 78 kilometers into the Iceberg Nature Reserve as fast as possible, with the hope of being able to get a few hours sleep before pushing on towards Montague.
Oh, it's that time in the evening when the eyelids start closing. It's time to bring out the magic weapon.
I just sing.
After crossing the Buffelsrivier and 6 hours of riding in the pitch-black moonless night, Matt and Andrew were in for a big surprise when they finally reached the Iceberg Nature Reserve support station at 2:30 a.m.
Just arrived here. It's freezing cold, and funnily enough, we arrived at the lodge and we saw a bicycle helmet in the window. We looked through and there's Zirk's bike, so we've actually managed to catch him. We thought he'd be possibly in Montague by now. Although he's our mate, we're sleeping next to the enemy tonight, so the race is on tomorrow.
After 3 short hours of sleep, the trio of Andrew, Matt and Cirque, riding together again for the first time in 3 days, wolfed down some food and prepared their cold weather gear for the chilly morning air. The final day of the Freedom Challenge traditionally consists of an 8-kilometer portage up the Steynskloof Valley, and riders may only start out on this leg between 3 a.m. and 8 a.m. each day. All 3 riders realized that if they wanted to make the remaining 270 kilometers before the closing of the 8 a.m. start window the next morning in 25 hours' time, then they would need to work together and move swiftly and consistently.
Disturbed my peaceful sleep, finished my cold plate of food. Like a thief in the night they came in. So, can't shake them, man. Can't beat them, gotta join them. No, they did a strong cycle last night, I must say, very brave. Leaving at 8 o'clock in pitch darkness, going for 70 k's.
Making their way through the Iceberg Nature Reserve, the riders entered the 7th and final section of the Freedom Challenge, the Breda River section. The route then heads southwest into the Winelands near the picture book town of Montague, before heading past Ashton, and then over the Breda River itself. From McGregor, the route traverses 2 difficult portage sections towards Hammanshof and into the Dwarsberg Valley, for the final 8-kilometer portage up Steynskloof Valley, before descending into the finish at Ashanti Wine Estate in Paarl. Having passed through the Iceberg Nature Reserve by mid-morning and the welcome relief of the 29-kilometer downhill Oudeberg Pass, the 3 were encouraged by the changing landscape. Karoo Fynbos was slowly being replaced by Cape Winelands, and for the first time on the journey, the reality of actually reaching Cape Town, all the way from Pietermaritzburg by bicycle, was starting to sink in with the riders.
Oh, just soaking up some winter sun. After our solid almost 3 hours sleep last night. Pushed a quick little 70 this morning through to Montague. So we're so on track now. We've got another about 150 or so to go through tonight to Dwarsberg. Hopefully we can have a rest there this evening and then final push tomorrow. But just glad we're on track because 2 days ago it didn't look like this was possible.
Once at the Montague Guesthouse support station, Matt, Andrew and Cirque received the news from the race office that a strong cold front with torrential rain has moved in over Cape Town. Realizing that they were in for a long, cold and wet night, they took a few minutes to soak up the sun. The reality of the race is that the closer the route gets to Cape Town, the more difficult it becomes to keep it off the tar roads. And for the first time in 2.5 weeks, the riders have to contend with traffic, a stark reminder of the real world after 16 days of wide open spaces and deserted roads. After heading over the Breda River on their way to McGregor, the route again heads off onto district roads. At this late stage in the race, after days and days of early starts and riding late into the night, all 3 riders are close to exhaustion.
Everything hurts. Ours is closing. A long way to go still today. Got to make it happen.
The 3 cyclists resorted to walking up sharp inclines in order to conserve what little strength they had left. But despite the mammoth mental and physical obstacles ahead of them, they always managed to remain in a positive frame of mind. Contrary to what the riders had expected, the route does not go through many populated areas, and so the opportunity to stop at a local spaza shop was a novelty too good to pass up.
Such itchy back.
By late evening, the cold front had arrived with intermittent rain beginning to fall.
See that path there at the bottom? Yeah, that's too wet. Watch this thing going down here. You see, we have to go around the dam.
Got a little bit lost trying to get to Castro, so we stopped here at some houses, asked for directions, and the guys have shown us the road. So it's stopping wet outside. It's raining now. It looks like probably the next 100 k's is going to be wet, so we need to get warm for that.
Tot waar gaan meneer hulle nou nog?
Ons gaan nou
Kaap toe.
Parel toe.
Oor Parel.
Vanaand gaan ons by Rosenwil uitkom.
Waar gaan meneer hulle nou nog hieroor?
Ja.
Sjoe.
Nou ja, ek wil nou heel pad by.
The start of the evening over the first rough off-road section involved some very tricky nighttime navigation.
Successful start. We found the kraal at the top of the hill. Map says follow this road till we see some power lines. That's going to be quite hard. And we need to cut into the bush to find another track. So it's pretty technical, especially at night, especially in the rain. But first step down, so we're on the right path.
An unexpected highlight of the night was meeting a family on a remote section of the route who had been following the riders' progress via the riders' tracking units on the race website and had come out into the rain to wish them well.
To the right, if it bends around to the left. If it, I'm sure this is the dam, and then it'll arc around.
After successfully navigating themselves over the mountain from the adjoining valley, the team made it to the Castro support station less than 10 kilometers from Greyton in the Teerwaterskloof.
You've been cycling without one like that?
You're mad, bro. I don't know what
How do you keep that thing up?
After an unexpected 5-star meal, the team did their calculations and settled in for a 2-hour sleep before heading out to complete the remaining 50 kilometers before 8 a.m. the next morning.
Things are good. I think the guys are in a good spirit. We're ready to hit this last section. It's going to be long, it's going to be pretty wet, but spirits are high. We know that every meter we make forward is closer to the finish.
Despite the fact that Tim James had already claimed first place 2 days previously, Matt, Andrew and Cirque had all set themselves the goal of finishing within the previous year's record time of 16 days and 10 hours. They also faced the prospect of missing the 3 a.m. to 8 a.m. start window for the last Steynskloof portage. This would mean that they would have to sit around at the Swartberg support station for a full day doing nothing. And that would not be a fitting end to this epic journey. By 2 a.m. the 3 riders had reached the second of the 2 portage sections on their way to the Bruntvlei prison just outside Worcester.
It's been one brutal uphill now, 55 minutes we've been pushing, loose, rocky scree. Looks like we're just about at the neck. 1 hour to go 4 kilometers. It's tiring, tiring.
After 4 long hours of cold, wet riding, the team finally made it to the Swartberg Valley support station on the Holsloot River at 6:17 a.m. exhausted but elated at having made it in before the 8 a.m. cutoff. It had been a monumental effort, but they knew that they could not relax, as potentially the hardest part of the entire race was still to come that day, the 8-kilometer hike up the Steynskloof Valley. After sneaking in a quick 1-hour catnap, the team was up again for the last time in the race.
This will be the last morning in a while. I start preparing myself and donning my little helmet and getting ready and getting butterflies and fill my stomach because I know what a long day it's going to be. It's exciting, but it's sad as well because it's been a most amazing adventure.
Arriving at the Steynskloof Dam and the start of the trail at precisely 8 a.m., Matt, Andrew and Cirque gathered themselves one last time.
This is it, Setbacks, what we have heard so much about, what we've been preparing for, the last day of Freedom Challenge, so, well, we hope.
As the riders set off, it was Andrew who was the most nervous, having been up this valley before in the inaugural Freedom Challenge in 2004, and was under no illusion as to exactly how difficult it would be. There is a very rudimentary path that runs halfway up the valley that is often very hard to follow. But from 4 kilometers in, the path ends and each person has to spread out and make their own way, stumbling over the sharp vegetation-covered rocks and battling against the prickly fynbos and hakea bushes. The weather was also not making progress any easier, as the trio made their way looking for the points of least resistance, covering only 1 kilometer every hour in the hostile conditions. Just before the end of the valley, Andrew and Matt took shelter under an overhanging rock so that Matt, who was on the verge of hypothermia, could put on his last remaining dry clothes. This gave Cirque a 20-minute advantage, and he was the first to climb out of the valley onto the mountain club's hiking hut access road.
I'm feeling relieved now. I'm out of this hellhole. If I knew that we were going to be doing this, I don't think I would have done this race. I don't think so. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. It took us 8 hours of throwing your bike forward into the ferns and then holding yourself afterwards. You know, especially on a day like this, it's terrible weather.
Yeah, I sprained my ankle and rolled it over and over and over and over again. You can't see the rocks under the fynbos, you don't know where you're walking. Must have fallen 40, 50 times. Getting stuck into valleys with these seriously overgrown shrubs and reeds, having to turn back a K, go uphill the K, finding nowhere, and seriously tough 8 hours, and wow, the conditions and the elements seriously tested us today.
You talk about redefining your limits. I think that's all the redefining I need in my life. I don't think I'm going to experience too many things harder than that.
After the dejected riders had prepared themselves for the last 30 kilometers to the finish, the surprises were not over.
I just noticed that I've got one of my cleats missing.
Without a cleat to attach his shoes to the pedals, progress in the wet conditions would become slow and tedious.
I'm cold, I'm wet, I'm exhausted, I'm hungry, but I'm so excited. We've got about 10 Ks left. It's been a massive last 3 days. The last 3 nights we've slept about 4 hours. Legs are absolutely exhausted. I feel like jelly. And it's about 10 Ks to go. I can smell the sweet smell of home. I just can't wait to get there. It's going to be soon now.
Once the riders emerged from the Steynskloof Valley, they found themselves right at the entrance to the Huguenot's Tunnel. The route had taken them right to the outskirts of Paarl, with only 25 kilometers of tar in the last 2,300 kilometers. All that was left to do was climb the Dutoitskloof Pass, head off onto the forestry roads from the summit and descend into a shanty wine farm below. Fearing he too was close to hypothermia, Cirque had kept pushing on and finally arrived at a shanty wine farm at 6:41 p.m., much to the joy of his family and friends, to claim a very respectable second place. As the rain continued to pour, just over half an hour later, Matt and Andrew reached Ashanti under police escort to wrap up an emotional joint third place in a time of 16 days and 12 hours and 40 minutes.
Today has been the longest day.
Well done. Thank you. Yes, really good. Fire.
Race organizer Dave Wadilov was on hand to greet each and every finisher and offer them a much-needed slice of pizza.
She can't believe we've ridden all the way from Pietermaritzburg to Cape Town. I think as things start to settle down, it'll start to sink in, particularly for Matt. I think it's an achievement way beyond something anyone would ever expect of him. I think he can be very proud of himself.
Well, this is what I've been looking for a long time, eh? Hot food, hot fire, and just get off my saddle for a while, eh? I don't want to ever see that thing again.
As per race tradition, each finisher receives a blanket similar to those that young Basotho men are awarded at initiation ceremonies after they've completed their rite of passage to manhood. A fitting prize indeed. As the torrential rain continued to fall the following day, the group of Steve Burnett and Andrew Barnes were also dealt their fair share of drama. They had been unable to safely cross a flooding river halfway up the Setbacks portage and were forced to turn back and ride an extra 60 kilometers back to Swartberg through Rawsonville to reach the Kloof Pass, riding their bicycles on the N1 highway. A massive 60-kilometer detour on an already long and miserable day.
I've been wet since 6 o'clock this morning. Soaked, drenched. Waterproof gloves, eh?
Once up and over the Kloof Pass, the group started arriving at Ashanti effectively 3 days after Matt and Andrew, as most of them had set off in the batch 2 days before at the start.
Didn't know whether I'd be able to make it or not, but yeah, we got here in one piece. So.
Yeah, jeez, I won't be riding this bike tomorrow. I'm gonna show you.
Andrew Barnes and Darnie Nell both only had a few days to rest before the start of the 4-day Berg River Canoe Marathon in order to complete the Freedom Challenge Extreme Triathlon. At the back of the field, the farmers from Ikopo were still taking things at their own pace, enjoying the scenery as well as each other's company, before finally arriving at Ashanti a few days later.
Good sleep is what we need. And some dry clothes. 5 days of wetness.
After 4 weeks of the most beautiful South African landscapes, after 2,300 kilometers of the most diverse mountain biking imaginable, through 16 different conservation areas, 6 different ecosystems and biomes, and over 45,000 meters of cumulative vertical gain, only 18 riders managed to make it all the way from Pietermaritzburg to Paarl on the 2008 Toyota Freedom Challenge race across South Africa. The Freedom Trail is a self-sustaining route that anyone can ride in various sections all year round. Log on to www.freedomchallenge.org.za for more information on the route, the Freedom Challenge, the Ride to Roads, and the many community development initiatives currently being implemented on the route. And we will see you out on the trail. The 2008 Toyota Freedom Challenge Race Across South Africa is brought to you by Toyota. Toyota, lead the way.